expressing the need, communicating that this is kind of what I need, this is what I like, this is what I need. And then the other person is going to need to share that too, because they're going to say, well, okay, well,
Absolutely.
this is what I need. This is where I'm happy. This is the zone I like to be in. And then if we have some differences, then how can we meet in the middle? All right, that's called compromise. Yeah,
Right.
we don't always like to do that either. But that's the key is that we both compromise a little bit to say, okay, I want to meet you in the middle so that I'm happy, you're happy, and we're both now meeting each other's needs. We're both able to communicate properly. We're both able to kind of give each other space when needed. We're respecting boundaries. We're doing all those wonderful things that actually help us have a good, healthy relationship.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Everything's Okay, a mental health podcast brought to you by Crazy Ant Media. Today's episode is a powerful one. We're talking about attachment styles, healing hidden wounds, and how your greatest failures can become the foundation for your greatest successes. This episode will give you practical tools and hope for the journey ahead. We are joined today by Bryan Power, who has an incredible story about hitting rock bottom in his marriage specifically, and how what felt like the end became the beginning of something much more stronger than ever before. Bryan, how are you doing today?
Great, Logan. Thanks so much for having me on the show today. It's an honor to be here and pleasure to be able to share my story. Hope we can give some people some hope and some information today that'll be beneficial.
Oh, absolutely. Because, it's these type conversations that I think start that, right? And these aren't always the conversations that are easy to have. Nobody just sits down around the table and says, let me tell you about this, right? So it's these type things that start those conversations. And we couldn't be more happy to have you on because I feel like so many people have gone through what you went through, myself included. And so let's dive into it. Let's give a little bit of for anybody who doesn't know, as we said at the tease, your marriage collapsed. It was a very dramatic event, but things I feel like led up to that, right? So yeah, you talk about how your childhood wasn't perfect, how it wasn't great, and you guys both kind of came from fractured families. So let's dive in. Give everybody a little bit of an introduction to yourself and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I was born in 1969 to my mom who already had a son. So my brother's about 15 months older than me. She would turn 21. Sorry, she was 20 when she had me. Turned 21 the week after. And shortly thereafter, really, she was divorced from my father, who battled addiction.
Mm,
He was in trouble with that stuff. So here my mom is 21 years old, throughout the 70s, raising two boys on her own. Really had her own dysfunctional family that she came from, and really struggled to deal with providing a good stable home. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of craziness, as you can imagine, and we moved around a lot, so
yeah.
stability was something that really was wasn't too wasn't around very much, right? So the early years of my life were filled with a lot of chaos and turmoil, and some things that, again, people, I think, kids shouldn't see or be around and be a part of per se. But that's what happens sometimes when you have a 21-year-old young parents who have a lot of their own dysfunction, if you will. But those things would set a pattern in my own life as I grew older. That perception that we get from early childhood really starts to play out throughout our lives
Without
into our
doubt.
adulthood. And unless we really deal with and address those things, they're going to affect our lives really till the day we die. And so my wife also came from a similar type of situation. A little bit more military based for her, but also extremely dysfunctional. A lot of drugs or alcoholism and some of those types of things in that area as well. And so we just both grew up with some really dysfunctional, childhoods that really would play out in our lives and ultimately would hit a head in 2024.
I just a couple of questions there because, like I said, I similar background. Mine was an addiction. My dad passed away, but same thing. My mom was left to raise three young kids on her own, and there was a lot of instability and moving around a lot, and a lot of things you probably shouldn't go through as a kid or see as a kid. Um, uh, Me and I'm sure I'm curious because you said your mom was just 21. My mom was a bit older than that, but like that's still kind of young. That's still kind of vibrant. That's still kind of was there a lot of people coming in and out that you were exposed to, and did that play early on in relationships for you when you started dating and when you started had to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I saw my mom, fall in love and fall out of love and relationships and those things. So, so I would get attached to some of these guys and, think that they were pretty cool, and then all of a sudden that they'd be gone, and
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. So it's just kind of like, okay, well, that one was over. But absolutely, yeah, all those things playing, a factor in a child's life, because a child just looks at everything as the world revolves around them.
that's right.
And the reason that these people are leaving is because of me. The reason they're here is because of me, but they're also leaving because of me, type of thing. And so, a lot of the wounds are just formed through these experiences. And a lot of times as children, I don't even remember, honestly, most of those people that were in and out. I do remember some of them, right? But I can't remember all of them, as she dated and struggled and tried to find love, type of thing. So, my mom did finally remarry when I was about, 17, 18 years old. So, but by then, of course, a lot of my, life was formed, and a lot
That's
of my
right.
thoughts and everything were foreign. But yeah, everything that happens to a child will affect them and begin to play into their perception and how they view the world, how they view relationships, how they handle, life. And that was definitely a big factor. And moving around didn't help either.
No,
That
yeah. Just when you
that
think
just
you've got some stability and you've made some
yeah.
friends and everything seems normal, boom.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah, and
crap, we got to start all
and then
over.
my father was in and out, so my father would come around for a little while, cause some chaos, things would get crazy, then he'd be gone for a year, and
Yeah.
that type of thing. So I have severe abandonment issues and stuff like that from these, from the childhood experiences.
Oh, most definitely. I was, yeah, curious too. That was my next question because I remember growing up, my parents got divorced when I was 3 years old. And then with the other step parents, there became jealousy because there was a little overlap, specifically, with my dad and mom and stepmother. There was a little overlap there to where, of course, jealousy does step into play. And then, throughout my entire life, I can only really remember my parents talking to each other and being in the same room maybe like a handful of times, 5 times. So, like, what was your parents' relationship like after they separated? When he came back into the picture, were they like on again, off again?
No, there was no cordial. It was, I think my mom tried to help my father as much as possible because she just that kind of way, and
Right,
maybe was hoping, maybe, but my father would actually met somebody else, uh, who would become his wife, Ginny, who was kind of like my stepmom, but I never really
hmm,
knew her that much per se. But no, it
right,
was chaos. If my father came in, it was arguing, it was fighting, it was craziness, it was, struggle. It was never fun. It wasn't like there were loving moments or any type of let's get back together type of thing. It was,
Yeah.
where's the childhood, where's the, the payments for the kids,
right.
where's the money, where's this, there's that, and it would culminate literally when I was about 9 years old. I literally watched my father pull a knife on my mom in
Mm.
a drunken rage, after being with him all day at the bar, so
Right.
that's the type of childhood that I came through and kind of saw, and that was kind of a culmination, if you will, of all those early years, right?
Right.
Um,
And
yeah.
like you said that, these are the formative years that you're talking about. So without even realizing, you are learning how to be an adult. You are learning the behaviors and the patterns that you are going to exhibit as an adult, whether you want to or not, because you are a product of your environment, whether people think so or not. And so, unbeknownst and unwanted, this is characteristics that you're going to carry now into adulthood that are clearly, as we
Yeah.
figure out as we go along, right, which you're about to talk about, I'm sure, will mess us up, will lead to bad things that we don't want to happen, but we don't realize until we start digging in that, oh, this is why I act this way. This is why I do this. This is why, you don't even realize that's been put into you until you see it. And then, because, right, we all say, I'm never going to be like my dad. I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to. And then inevitably, we're in a situation, we're in a big fight, and we're doing what dad did. And we're like, uh-oh, wait a minute. We got to stop here. So talk about that. I know in my case, when I came together with my ex-wife, it was, we were both coming off, like you said, very turbulent lives. A lot of tragedy had just happened. Her dad was really sick and she had lost her mom. I had just lost my little brother. We both kind of came from bad lives to begin with. And I think that we came together because we needed each other at that particular point. There was like, you understand me, I understand you, we can help get through this. Looking back at it over all these years, right after the divorce, after the stuff, you go, maybe we were just never gonna work, but at that time we needed each other for to get through whatever we were going through. Talk about you and your wife and how you came together. Do you find that maybe that's something similar? That, I mean, obviously going into it we think we're going to be married forever, this is my one, this is, it's going to be great, it's going to be perfect. And then as it deteriorates, but what do you think was the initial get together? Was it you were coming together and you just, okay, you've been through this, I've been through this, maybe we can figure it out?
Yeah, no, I mean that can happen a lot, right? They call it trauma bonding, right? Where
Right.
where the trauma causes us to get together and kind of help each other, fix each other, try to do all this stuff. And sometimes we can find ourselves in relationships for that reason. And it's all subconscious. We don't really understand it, but we just find that we're attracted to this person for some particular reason. And it can turn out that that's ultimately the reason, that there's some underlying wounds that are playing out that are kind of pushing us in that direction. I
Right.
would say for my wife and I, like, she had just come out of a marriage. She was about 5 months removed from her ex-husband. They were, separated. They weren't divorced at that point. I had just ended a relationship with a fiance, a woman that I was kind of, planning on marrying, and that ended pretty abruptly. And when I met her, yeah, we were both kind of dealing at that stage of our lives, but we didn't start. I didn't rush right into a relationship with each other. We kind of just dated for a little while, and as I began to heal and I continued to heal from my relationship with the other situation, I did wake up one day and realize, like, I've got something really great here. Like, this is a really great girl. And I was like, wow, like, wait a second, like, what am I doing here? This is phenomenal. And so I decided to embrace it. And it was just something different. I remember holding her one day, and I just felt like there was something different about this girl. I didn't understand
Right.
it. And so we just began that journey, and that relationship started, and it was really fantastic for the most part for a while. I did unfortunately move back to Florida for a short time. I was living in Massachusetts where I met her, and then I realized, oh, do I belong here? Do I belong in Florida? What am I doing here? And I decided to move back to Florida. Kind of broke her heart. As fate would have it, I would come back to Massachusetts, and we would pick up where we left off. And once we spent a little bit more time at that point, we were going to make it work. Even if we had to deal with some long distance now and then. So I was spending a lot of my summers and fall and stuff like that in Massachusetts. I would spend my winters down in Florida, and we kind of dated like that for the first 3 years
Oh
until she
wow.
got pregnant. And then once she got pregnant, it was time to make sure that I was going to stay here permanently, which we had already talked about.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
that point, yeah, at that point we were kind of all in, and I was, things were going pretty well and really pretty good with the relationship, and so that just kind of moved it along. So I would decided to spend my time here in Massachusetts. We got engaged, all that good stuff, and since then I've been here. But it's a good question, right? Am I here together? Are we together because of the wounds, or are we together because we truly love each other? And sometimes people come into our lives for that season to help us, get pointed in the right direction. You may have had that time with your wife, ex-wife here, and maybe through that experience, you became more aware, hopefully, as even when it ended, that, that season ended, and because of that part of that journey, it made you a little bit better man. Maybe you got some more awarenesses. It did help you through a particular time, but maybe just that chapter needs to close, and sometimes it's just time to open up another chapter. And hopefully, we've done enough work to open up a better chapter, something more exciting, something even healthier along the way. So sometimes we can work together and heal that relationship and grow together. My wife and I were fortunate enough to kind of do that. But if not, and that relationship does end, hopefully that's just to help us move in the right direction to the next phase, which is hopefully a next chapter that's going to be even better.
Was that healing and working together to try to, like, okay, let's put an end to this and move to the next chapter and help each other get through, was that immediate, or was it ugly first? Because you
Oh,
describe it as rock bottom and a
Dustin, that's
collapse,
a
dramatic,
fantastic.
right?
That's
So
hilarious, Dustin. Yeah, no, I find, unfortunately, right, a lot of times we have these issues, and we had some small fights, we had some issues, but there was still a lot of love. We still had a lot of laughs. We still
right.
had a great connection. We had some struggles, but it never felt like it was overwhelming to the point where, we were gonna, ultimately break up, or kind of lose that. It was just your typical parenting styles were a little bit different, little different ideas on life here and there and stuff like that. So, but it would all come to a head in 2024, where things really hit the fan, and the emotional baggage that we were now carrying began to play itself out
Mm.
in a way that became extremely traumatic. Lots of emotions, heightened emotions on both sides, to the point where, she would pull away. I would try to get closer. The more I tried to get close, she would pull away more. I was trying to save the family, trying to keep it all together. And it just seemed like the more I tried, the more it just became a mess. Yeah, we wound up both seeing some therapists, and those therapists were helpful, but at the same time, it almost felt like it was adding a little fuel to the fire because of the work that was being done. A lot of the emotions were also additionally charged. And it eventually hit a head where she, after about 4 months of this chaos, she would put a restraining order against me for emotional safety.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just for emotional safety. I would never threaten my wife physically, but emotionally, we just were beating each other up, and she couldn't, find emotional stability to the point where she just put a restraining order. And when that happened, I felt like the relationship was over. It was time to move on. I just gave up on the relationship, if you will. But I knew I had to, get it together for myself and continue to do the work, and hopefully have a healthy relationship with somebody else. But yeah, no, unfortunately, it wasn't an easy ride. It was a tough ride, and it eventually hit rock bottom. But hitting rock bottom was probably the best thing I think that ever happened for both of us, and
Yeah.
it ultimately would prove to be a very healing moment for us and our relationship.
I love that. Yeah, because I mean, it's all a journey, it's all a process. To be able to learn along the way of things you did right and things you did wrong is so very important. And, the younger you get started at, recognizing all of these things, the better it is. Because I feel like a lot of us, I'm happy because obviously I'm youthful. Look at my skin. But and I feel like
Lucky.
a lot of people do not like start their self journey until an older age, till where they feel like they've let so many bridges burn and they feel like they can't go back to certain situations. But I mean, it's important to have that inner work, have those self conversations to where you are able to help yourself while also helping your relationship, helping your marriage, helping, anything else that you have going on in your life. But I'm very curious though, because, you've come on to talk about one specific thing, integrated attachment theory.
Created by Thais Gibson, who's out of Canada, and it's based off the attachment styles. Okay,
Mhm.
attachment theory has been around really since the 70s, and there's four major attachment styles. There's a secure attachment style, an anxious, preoccupied, dismissive avoidant, and what's called a fearful avoidant, or sometimes, yeah, they call it something different, but we always call it fearful avoidant. So those are the four major ones. Secure being the only healthy one. The other three are
Right.
kind of dysfunctional, and so a lot of us will fall into that dysfunctional three zones, if you will. But what I love about Thais Gibson's work is she began to do work to begin to heal the attachment styles, not just understand the attachment styles, because I think that's important to understand it. But then once we understand our attachment styles, how do we then heal it? And she put together six main elements to the program that really, I think, help any relationship, which are number one, your core wounds.
Mm.
Those are the emotional subconscious patterns that we're doing. Number two, we're going to work on our needs, discovering our true needs, and then beginning to, learn how to, meet our needs as much as possible on our own.
Right.
And then three, we're going to work on our behaviors. Okay, we're going to think about, how do we act? How do we kind of, change our behaviors? We're going to talk about communication. How do we communicate properly? And then we have different communication styles. So sometimes understanding how to communicate differently is important. We're also going to talk about boundaries. How do we set boundaries, right?
Mm.
And then, of course, we're going to talk about our emotions and how do we handle and control our emotions and deal with our emotions and use emotions really as a source of information, not being afraid to be, if I'm angry, okay, why am I angry? What's causing the anger? What are the thought patterns that I'm having that are causing me to be angry? And if I can learn from that, then I can begin to fix that. And if I can begin to learn and fix it, then I can begin to actually, change the behaviors, experience different lives, different patterns, different ways of doing things that can now improve my life rather than continue to be detrimental to my life.
Right. And, we talk about this all the time, and I'm a very firm believer in this too. When you're talking about things like, okay, I'm mad. Why am I mad? Right. I'm a firm believer in you have to look inward to be able to move forward on the outside. Right. So if you don't know why you're mad, we're in trouble because we can't fix it unless we know why we're this way. And if you're
Yeah.
scared to look in, if you're scared to go back to those dark places to figure out what's causing the anger, then you're never going to be able to move forward. And so I like the idea that you say that emotions are important, but you have to figure out what those emotions are and why you have them. Because if you don't know that, you're never going to be able to have that movement forward. So it does require a lot of looking inward to be able to do that. I'm curious, what was your attachment style when you figured it out? What was it?
Yeah, yeah. So when I first started doing the work, I thought I was more anxious, preoccupied, and my wife was dismissive, avoidant. Complete opposites, right? Because anxious, preoccupied, they crave attachment, they love connection, they love communication,
Right.
all this other stuff. And then she was really dismissive. Yeah, if we would fight, she would always stonewall me. A couple days, maybe a week or two sometimes.
Yeah.
She definitely is very hyper independent, hyper, very tough time connecting with her emotions. So I really felt like we were both on that side. As I learned more about it, I really feel like we're both in the middle. We're what's called those fearful avoidant, but we lean So I'm fearful avoidant, but I lean more anxious, preoccupied, certainly in the relationship to my wife, where she was leaning, fearful avoidant, but also leaning more dismissive. And so
Interesting.
we have all those traits in between, but and I feel like a lot of us are. The more I learn, I feel like almost all of us are fearful avoidant, but we tend to lean one way or the other,
Right.
depending upon the situation and the relationship. But yeah, so that was kind of my attachment style, and again, that's what caused a lot of friction. So as I was leaning anxious, and her dismissive side would come out more and more, I began to feel that fear of abandonment, that fear of being alone, feeling unsafe, feeling like I didn't know where I was going to live, where I was going to rest my head, how I was going to keep the family together. All that fear began to play out, and it just triggered my emotions, which triggered her emotions, which just kind of just got into this emotional turmoil and chaotic spot, which was just it was
And
crazy because
that's
you couldn't control it.
yeah,
It was
that's
crazy.
huge too. I don't think enough people realize that when you come up the way that you came up, that abandonment issue is real. And I feel like you don't even realize that you're going into a relationship already expecting it to be abandoned, right? Like I know I did. I know now. I did. I wasn't aware of that going into my marriage or into a relationship before the marriage, but I realize now that because of the abandonment, and again, mine was in series of a lot of people close to me dying, and I felt abandoned and alone. And every time I get close to somebody, somebody's gone. But I never realized I was taking that into a relation. And how can you possibly go into a long-term successful relationship if without even knowing you're already expecting it to fail and you be abandoned? That's like, uh-oh, well, maybe I'm
Yeah.
forcing that to happen without even realizing I'm forcing that to happen. So again, I think that kind of goes back to recognizing your emotion and say, what did I just do something to cause this? Was it something I did? Was it something I or not do? And so this is really interesting stuff to me. So when it all falls apart on you,
Yeah.
and you realize, like you said, at one point you just gave up on it, realized this isn't going to happen. I can't fix this. How do you decide to make that? I've got to turn this into a learning experience. I've got to find some growth here. I've got to find a way to move forward and make this a positive thing and not a negative thing.
Yeah.
Where does that spark come from? What was it for you? I know for me, a lot of it had to do with my daughter. I'm like, I've got to
Yeah.
figure out a way because we have a kid and we've got to figure this out and I've got to be able to successfully do this. What was it for you? Was there a defining moment where you're like, I can do this. I can change this?
Uh, it was desperation, right? And pain, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, pain is a great motivator. People will definitely do more to avoid pain than they will to, experience good things, right? So, I was in a painful spot. I was in a tough situation. I was fortunate enough to come across the integrated attachment theory program about a month before the restraining order came on and I was thrown out of the house. So, I was already interested in this work because I was fascinated by stuff that I was learning. And so, when I did get kicked out of the house, I just decided, okay, it was over with her. I wasn't trying to fix that relationship anymore. I was just accepting it. I was really trying to do the work to let her go, let the relationship go.
Right.
I wasn't trying to do the work to get her back.
Right.
Okay, so so that's important. I think too is that we do the work not to get somebody back. We do the work because we want to heal ourselves, get happier,
Exactly.
get ourselves into a better spot, and then see what happens. And anything can happen when you do that. But I was already knew a direction to go in. I already had some good stuff to work on. So I just put my head down and say, you know what, my goal is to have a healthy, happy relationship with somebody. And I know that's going to happen again. And I just want to be prepared for that. So I was just going to continue down that pattern. And I was very fortunate to have a good platform that to work off of and start putting tools in my belt. As I learned different patterns here, I began to just, these are just tools that I can use to have a good relationship. And now I have a lot more tools. So when my wife and I did get back together, I had some more tools to go on and work with. And that's all it is. I always say there's nothing worse than losing somebody you love in your life simply because you don't have the tools necessary to keep them there.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of breakups happen because we just don't have the right tools and we don't know how to fix these things. We don't know how to do it. But the first step is to admit that we don't know and admit that we have some of
Yes.
our own faults, that we are responsible for that relationship as much as the other person. A lot of times, when things started going south, she challenged me to get therapy because she thought everything was wrong with me. I
Exactly.
challenged
Yeah.
her to get therapy because I thought everything was wrong with her. Okay, as it turned out, we both learned that we both have our own issues and we both needed to learn on that. And so that was a blessing in disguise.
And
But
that's
yeah,
normal, right? The initial thought is to always accuse. It's got to be your fault. I
it
didn't.
can't be
I
me.
didn't.
I'm
It can't
perfect.
possibly be me,
That's right.
right?
I'm
Like,
perfect.
so you did this, but did I cause you to do that? Of
Right.
course
That's
not,
right.
right? Or that's just the normal reaction.
Right.
I like that I want to talk about the tools a little bit, because one that I think is really important, and I think you should establish this going into the relationship. It would be much better than figuring it out after the relationship, right? And that's needs and boundaries.
Mm.
I think it's so important to say, coming into this, I've come from this shit.
Yeah.
And I have these needs that you have to understand are vital to me being able to be happy. And then I also have these boundaries where I'm still dealing with some stuff, and I need you to respect the fact that we can't go there, or I can't do this right now, and you need to. I think if you come into a relationship setting that, saying, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I need from you, this is what I need you to respect that I don't need from you, how are we going to do this? It would just be so much better to do that than to figure that out afterwards and go, well, she hated me because she didn't know that was a bad thing for me, or like, kind of a thing.
Yeah, yeah. It'd be so great if we just had a certain playbook. You just follow.
Yeah.
If you do A, B happens. If you do B, C happens. It doesn't work like that per se.
Right.
But you're right. I think the key is to get ourselves to a healthier point. So we come into a relationship in a healthier mind frame, in a healthier zone. We have some of these tools already. Then yes, we are able to early on in the relationship have some good healthy boundaries and see if they respect that boundary. Right. We're not having
Right.
extreme boundaries that are maybe ridiculous, maybe having no boundaries, like the anxious, preoccupied tend to have no boundaries, right? So
Right.
I'm not boundaryless, but I'm also not staunch with such boundaries that nobody can adhere to. Like, hey, we're just started dating and we're only going to see each other once every 2 or 3 months. Like, it's probably not going to work out, right? So
Yeah.
how can we find some balance here? But yes, expressing the need, communicating that this is kind of what I need, this is what I like, this is what I need. And then the other person is going to need to share that too, because they're going to say, well, okay,
Absolutely.
well, this is what I need. This is where I'm happy. This is the zone I like to be in. And then if we have some differences, then how can we meet in the middle? All right, that's called compromise.
Right.
We don't always like to do that either. But that's the key, is that we both compromise a little bit to say, okay, I want to meet you in the middle so that I'm happy, you're happy, and we're both now meeting each other's needs. We're both able to communicate properly. We're both able to kind of give each other space when needed. We're respecting boundaries. We're doing all those wonderful things that actually help us have a good, healthy relationship.
And that goes back to what you were saying at the very top of the show about the need for communication, because I think the way for any of that, of what you just said, to happen is like, okay, so first of all, you have to be able to spot unhealthy cycles, right? Like, okay, this isn't really working the way I think it should. But then you have to be able to be brave enough to communicate that and say, hey,
Right.
whoa, stop, this ain't working for me. Because
Yeah.
if you're scared to communicate with the other because you think out of some sense of failure, or you're afraid to cause friction, or
Yeah.
the other person is not going to know if they haven't identified that there's an unhealthy pattern happening if you don't say so. And I think a lot of times when we see relationships break it down in any aspect, not even just personal relationship, but work relationships or whatever the case may be, it's where we don't communicate properly how we're feeling, or that we see an issue that's causing us pain, right?
Yeah. I mean, how many people, say that the relationship broke up because there was no communication and stuff, right? So,
Exactly.
but what I find is that it's not that there's no communication, it's just that there's more miscommunication. And it's
Yes.
because we're speaking different languages, if you will. Okay, because we may be trying to say the same thing, but if I'm talking English and you're talking Chinese, we may have a tough time understanding each other. And so how we say it, what we say, that can make a difference. And the timing of it sometimes can be important. So number one, I always say, never have a conversation when you're triggered. When you're in an
Mm.
emotional state, when you're kind of heightened emotionally, that's never a good time to have a serious conversation. At that point, you want to back away, give each other some space. And you may say that, hey, look, you know what? I'm a little bit emotional. I want to get my head together. Can you give me a couple hours or something? I want to talk about this later when I'm in a better state. That's the first thing. Communicate that. Hey, I just need a little space. I do want to talk about this. This is important to me. But let's talk about it when I'm in a better mental state. Can we do that? Oh, yeah. Okay. That makes a little more sense. Not just walking away and thinking the other person understands. So stuff like that. Another one that my wife and I love to do is we hold space for each other.
Mm.
So in the past, a lot of times we would have a conversation about something serious, and I would always listen to defend.
Yeah.
Right, I'm kind of defend myself because I'm trying to figure out where her weaknesses are, so that I can her arguments, so I can pinpoint like you're wrong here. This isn't true. That's not right. This is, and that's not a healthy way to go.
No,
Right. So
no.
So I have to understand that number one, she loves me. She's not trying to leave me. She's not trying to say these things to hurt me per se. So I have to trust her at some level, right? And then if I do that, I can now what we do is we call what it's called holding space, where I let her talk for 5 or 10 minutes, completely uninterrupted. I just look her in the face and just listen to her and try to understand exactly what she's trying to share with me because I want to know this woman. I want to know what she's about. I want to understand her thoughts and stuff, right? And then when she's done, I then get to go for 5 or 10 minutes, right? And she also doesn't interrupt me. And she's also listening to understand me so that, again, we can have better understanding and just really that connection begins to flow 1,000 times better, you
Oh,
know? So
mhm.
we do little tricks like that. That just makes a huge difference than trying to have a nice argument in the car because you're on your way home and you, you just want to discuss it and neither one is in a state of mind to receive any information.
Oh, most definitely. And I always say, and I was grown up on the principle of, if you have a haste, like quick reaction to something, you should probably just sit with that for a second and let it pass. And I mean, throughout a relationship too, you can have a quick initial reaction to something and then bring it up and then it doesn't turn out well. So how do you find the patience to be more considering and able to listen for those 5 to 10 minutes
Yeah.
without being annoyed with the situation?
Yeah, I mean that's just practice. So
Yeah,
first is practice. When you
you
first
know.
do that, sometimes it's a little bit hard, but the more you do it, the more it becomes easier to do.
Hmm.
And there's that recognition of like realizing, like, wait a second, I know if I try to do anything here when she's mad at me, let's say, or I know she's in an emotional state, or vice versa, I know this isn't going to be healthy. I
Right.
know this is going to go bad. So why would I want to push this? And then it's just a matter of sometimes, again, practice, like, okay, holding my tongue. What I'll do is a lot of times, if let's just say I'm home and we're having a little argument, I may go for a walk for an hour or two. I may just walk around the block until I feel regulated
Hmm.
emotionally so that I now feel like, okay, I can have a more healthy conversation now than I could have an hour and a half ago, let's say, because my emotions are down. I've thought through this a little bit on my own and now we can have just a better situation. So again, that's part of the process of learning the emotions,
Right.
behaviors. How
Yeah.
do I deal with these things so that I'm doing them differently? And when we do them differently, it's amazing how we get different results.
Yes, right, right. I mean, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over and over and expect
Yeah,
different results, right?
yeah,
When we first started teasing that you were coming on the show and highlighting, we did get a lot of response because, as I said, this is a topic I feel like a lot of people are going
great.
through and dealing with on
Yeah,
on an everyday basis. So,
yeah.
we wanted to read a couple of those that we got and get your thoughts on it. Eric from Dallas, he wrote and said him and his wife love each other, but their fights are epic and they always
Mhm.
spiral out of control. And he says he knows that he is triggering her wounds, but he
Mm,
doesn't know how to stop.
mm.
Uh, Talk about that a little. What advice would you give him? Like, if you know you're triggering something, if you know you're bringing something that's hurting them, how do you stop that cycle? How do you break that? What advice would you give him?
Yeah, that's changing that behavior pattern. First of all, so recognition is huge. That's the first step, right? So, okay, now I know that, but how do I change what I'm doing? And
Right.
that's learning how to find different mechanisms that would, again, keep me from exploding this situation. And so, backing off and saying, honey, I want to talk to you about this, when the time is right. I want to, revisit this, but I'm going to take a little walk. Again, I like to go walking. So walking to me is easy. Just get out of the house, just go for a walk
Yeah.
and give it some time and then get to a point where you feel you're more regulated and then make sure that they're regulated so that you just don't push those buttons because it's not worth it, right? So it's a process. There's just so much work in that, and then it sounds like both sides need to do some work on there because if
Right.
she's getting that triggered, how much of that is because she has some wounds there that are just maybe being heightened that maybe are a little abnormal just to that point where they're not healthy. So maybe she has some wounds that are being touched, and then yeah, your inability to then stop yourself when you recognize it is a behavior pattern that we've got to change and work on. But it's practice. It's
And
practice.
that's what I would add to that. It's like if you understand that you're triggering her, you have to do like what we were talking about before. Look inward and say, "Why am I triggering her?" I mean, if you've already recognized and know that you're doing it, you have to ask yourself, "Why are you doing it then?" There
And
must be some reason that you're okay with triggering
yeah,
her.
and sometimes it's just our own wounds, right? It's our own wound
Exactly.
or our own pattern. Maybe we came through chaos like I did, and so I'm used to chaos. And so now, even though I'm pushing her buttons, I'm gonna, cause some chaos because that's where I'm comfortable. That's what I'm
That's
used to.
right.
That's where I feel safe, even though it's not safe. It's very unhealthy.
Yeah.
Okay, but if I've grown up in that world, sometimes that's what I'm used to. That's what's caused me again to push some of these buttons subconsciously. I don't want to do it, but I do it because I have my own issues, my own patterns that are unhealthy that are now causing this issue. So we've got to change that unhealthy patterns, those wounds. We've got to figure those out. And then we've got to get a control of our emotions more,
Oh
get to a
yeah.
point where we can be emotionally controlled and really change our behaviors, how we're handling this, what we're doing, and how do we, how do we get this to, level down before. I always say never, never, ever have a conversation when you're triggered.
Yeah.
So if she's in an emotional state, man, you've got to back away, or this just gets really bad.
Well, we got Megan from Chicago. I keep finding myself in the same kind of relationship. They start great, but always end with me feeling abandoned. How do
Mm.
I break this cycle?
Yeah, you've got to heal those attachment wounds, and it sounds like you probably have an abandonment wound like me. And so what's happening is that fear of abandonment subconsciously is causing us to behave in manners that ultimately push people away,
Mm.
and cause the abandonment. And so then we justify the abandonment and our thoughts because see, that person left me. I knew they would. But a lot of times it's because of our own subconscious wounds that we're now almost challenging them to walk away because of our own behavior. So we've got to fix that. And again, I love the integrated attachment theory program to begin helping, heal those wounds and begin that process. If not that, then find a trauma specialist, somebody in there that can really begin to heal your wounds here, because until you do that, you're going to continue to find these unhealthy patterns.
Mhm.
And it's not the person you're with. It's just you're going to continue your own patterns that are going to continue to cause this issue. Yeah, you've got to do the work to get that fixed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic, man.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We really appreciate you just coming on, giving your insight. Where can people follow your journey, follow more of your progress and your thoughtful insight? Because, yeah, I feel like a lot of people will want to after this conversation.
Well, thanks, guys. No, if anybody wants to, they can go to my website at Make Your Relationship Fail or My Relationship Fail. And it's a little bit of a play. It's obviously we don't want relationships to fail, but sometimes failure is a part of the recipe for success. So, but you can go there and you can learn a little bit about me, learn a little bit about integrated attachment theory. But I challenge you from there to join the personal development school from my website, which is Tice Gibson's school. And in there is a treasure trove of information, tons of videos, tons of great workbooks you can do to really learn and begin to do this work and begin to heal. When you join there through my website, I'm going to give you a free session with me so that you and I can talk. We can kind of hear your story. I can maybe, point you in the right direction as to, what maybe you need to go, what you need to be working on maybe immediately so you can get more results quicker. And if you decide to work with me on a long-term basis, I'd be happy to coach you through it so we can get move that needle a little bit faster if you decide you need a coach as well. If not, then by all means, have at it, get into that work through the personal development school and start doing this work and you'll learn and grow. There's amazing webinars there every day where she does webinars that are just, again, insightful, great community of people that are like us trying to figure out relationships, trying to heal, trying to understand. And you can just spend so much time and just change and grow within a few months. I've seen miracles happen for some people in there that are just unbelievable. I'm one of them, right? So, there's so many things that can happen, but just got to make the decision, number one, to just start that journey and start doing the work and move the needle, and then just see where that lands.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Most
Absolutely.
Yeah.
definitely. Well, again, like I said, thank you again so much. I'm super excited to see how people gravitate towards this conversation. And I look forward to continuing to have these conversations. Feel free to ever reach out to come back on and, we'll pick it up where we left off.
I'd love to come back, guys. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Of
Absolutely.
course.
Thank you for helping
Thanks,
us
guys.
start conversations because that's what it's all about.
Thank you.
Oh man, what a great conversation. And this week, our call to action is pay attention to your specific patterns. Do not judge yourself, but understand yourself. Healing starts with awareness to your inner work. That is for
Yes.
sure.
Yes, we
So
say.
super excited about this upcoming week. So super excited about bringing some of these tools into everyday conversations that Brian was talking about. That's for sure. Be sure to follow him, look at all of his websites, all the good things for sure. And then, of course, you can follow us on social media at Everything's OKP. We're on Instagram, X, Threads, all the good places. You can follow this podcast at Everything's OK Podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And, of course, watch the videos on YouTube. But, man, oh, man. Again, thank you all so much for listening, and a huge shout out to our guest, Bryan Power, and for sharing such an honest and inspiring story.
Yeah.
And remember, sometimes what feels like the end is really just the beginning of something stronger, right, Dustin?
Absolutely, man. And you just, it's important, like you said, look inward. just understand that healing comes with awareness, and nobody's perfect. And in the end, and Bryan was a perfect example, everything's okay. You're going to be all right.
That's right, man. That's right. And of course, if you or anyone else has had a mental health battle in the last couple years or ever, please be sure to reach out to us if you would like to at info@crazyantmedia.com. This podcast is for those people who have ever gone 10 rounds with their own mental health, that's for sure. But like Dustin said, it's important to remember that everything's okay.